The story of Nolan Ridge, and the return of me name is Nolan Ridge. I was an infantry soldier for Earth, fighting wars across half the galaxy before I turned 28. I fought in battles I never understood on planets that didn't even have names we could pronounce. But the memory that burns brightest in my mind is the day I should have died on Ericen Prime. We weren't supposed to land there. Intelligence said it was just a small detour, a forest moon with old mining sites, and air we could breathe. What they didn't tell us was that a Varathy patrol had been using it as a black site, a place where they tortured and killed rebels and anyone they thought supported aliens. We were attacked before we even touched the ground. Our dropship was torn apart. 4 of us made it to the forest, to die in the first hour, shot in the back with thermal rounds. I ran like a coward. I'll never forget the scream of Private Webb as he burned, or the silence when our communications stopped working. I took a plasma burn to my leg and couldn't move. I lay there behind some twisted tree roots, half conscious and bleeding into the dirt, praying for death. That's when I saw her. She wasn't human. She had big eyes, thin arms, and skin like weathered bark with soft blue light pulsing through her veins. I should have pulled my weapon or called for backup, but I didn't because she wasn't afraid. She didn't raise a weapon. She knelt beside me and started to sing. I still don't know what language it was, but as her hands hovered over my wound, the pain started to fade. It wasn't technology or magic. It was them, their people, the Avi. They didn't fight wars with bullets. They fought them with empathy. She carried me back to their village, a place hidden deep in the jungle and camouflaged by nature itself. There were maybe a few dozen of them left, all civilians, all unarmed. Every single one of them treated me like I was worth saving. They fed me and cleaned my wounds. They taught me words in their language and laughed when I cursed in mine. Her name was Seren. She was their healer. She barely came up to my chest, but she could move like the wind. Sometimes I caught her watching the stars when she thought no one was looking. She said their ancestors used to fly among them before we pushed them back into the dirt, and before the Varathy broke their wings. She never asked who I had killed. She never judged the blood on my hands. She just said one thing to me over and over: pain teaches, but kindness frees. I stayed for 3 weeks before the Varathy found the village. They came in gunships with fire and metal and screaming drones. I tried to warn them and told Seren to run, but she refused to leave her people. So I fought with every last bullet and every scrap of hate I had buried over the years. I watched children torn from mothers. I watched old ones shot for trying to shield the young. I saw Seren take a shot to the chest trying to protect me. They left her to die in my arms. I buried her with her people and marked their graves with the roots of their sacred tree. I swore on that blood-soaked ground that Earth would remember. They saved one of us, so we came back to save them all. When Command refused to authorize re-entry into Ericen Prime, I resigned. It didn't matter. Half my unit followed me anyway. Some had seen the videos I smuggled out, those haunting eyes. The burning village, the screams. It spread like wildfire. 100 soldiers turned into 1,000. 1,000 turned into fleets. We were no longer acting as Earth's army. We were acting as its honor. I stood at the helm of the Vigilance, Earth's oldest warship, now stripped of protocol and full of men who had bled to long for governments that forgot what loyalty meant. We didn't come for conquest. We came for justice. If the Varathy wanted war, they were about to learn what happens when humanity repays a favor. We moved in shadows. The Vigilance wasn't built for stealth, but we gutted her down to her bones and rebuilt her with black market shielding technology and salvaged cloaking equipment. She creaked like an old war dog, but she obeyed. Every bolt and every welded hole plate had purpose now, not to serve a flag or a politician, but to carry us back to the graveyard we left behind. We didn't fly the Earth emblem anymore. That flag had turned away from the Avi massacre and labeled it a non-strategic loss. Collateral damage in a disputed zone. That's what the report said. They saw the footage, heard the screams, still turned the page, and went back to their breakfast. So we stripped it off. Instead, we painted her with the Avi root spiral, Seren's people's mark for healing and remembrance. The men called it the wound that never forgets. I stood in the war room with 7 men who had once been decorated officers, now branded deserters. They didn't flinch or second-guess themselves. Each of them had read my logs and watched the shaky helmet footage of the burning huts, the drones ripping through civilians, and the last image I ever took of Seren covered in ash, lips parted mid-song, as blood soaked her robes. We're going back, and I said, but not to die for glory. We go in quiet, extract who we can, and burn what they used to kill. Permission to torch the whole black site. Commander Harlan asked, chewing the end of a stim stick. You get my signal, I said, and I want that place turned into molten glass. No one argued. We jumped to sectors to avoid Varathy patrol lines. These bastards had expanded since the first raid. They were moving civilians off-world now. Avi from other moons force shipped into labor colonies. DNA tagged and numbered like livestock. I intercepted a trade manifest that made me physically sick. One Avi female, adolescent, intact, listed as suitable for recreational services and sold for 20,000 Terran credits. Harlan broke his fist on a bulkhead that day. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were executioners. The plan was surgical. I would drop in with a 5-man squad, stealth gear, no heavy ordnance. If they caught us, we would be vaporized before we ever pulled a trigger. Our mission was extraction, scan for survivors, tag their positions, and transmit coordinates for fleet retrieval. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. I needed to see it to feel what was left. We touched down in the dead of night, cloaked by a blanket of choking jungle fog. Ericen Prime hadn't changed. The ground still pulsed with bioluminescent fungus. The trees still whispered with strange winds that never reached the surface. But something was missing, silence. Not peace, but silence. The kind that follows slaughter. I found the clearing where Seren's village had been. The roots of the sacred tree were charred now, twisted and blackened like claws. The graves we had made had been dug up. Bones picked clean, some arranged in piles like trophies. Private Kellen vomited in his helmet. I didn't stop him. I just stared. I dropped to my knees where I remembered her body had lain. I ran my fingers through the dirt, still stained dark. Not ash, not rot. Blood, sir. Came Dane's voice over communications. We've got movement, North Quadrant, heat signatures. Non-hostile. How many? 4. 2 adult-sized, to smaller. My heart jumped like a live wire in my chest. Alive? I asked. Moving, breathing, scared. I rose, my knees cracking from the crouch. We're going, I said. We advanced with stealth equipment, barely shadows in the fog. The jungle was tighter here, overgrown like it was trying to swallow the planet back into itself. We followed the signatures to a small ravine, hidden, narrow, and lit with faint blue fungus. Then I saw them, a mother, or something like it, with thin arms wrapped around a small one's. Avi, no doubt. Their chests pulsed with that faint blue light. The older one stepped forward, hands raised, not in fear or aggression, but in recognition. I stepped out of the shadows and disengaged my cloaking. My men held position. I'm not here to hurt you, I said, slowly removing my helmet. You knew. Someone like me. The Avi's eyes narrowed. She took a shaky step forward. Human, she said, voice cracked like wind through brittle leaves. I stopped breathing. You knew her? I whispered. She sang of you when she died. The others joined her then, broken, starved. One had a missing arm covered with an old, infected, blackened wrap. The smallest child clung to the woman's leg like a ghost. We got them back to the extraction zone. All 4. I wanted to weep. But there was no time for emotion. Not yet. Not until they were off this cursed rock as we lifted off. I looked down at the burning outline of the old village, half covered in jungle rot, half trampled by metal tracks. Vigilance. This is Ridge, I said into the communications. Package secured. Permission to proceed with Protocol Theta 4. There was silence on the other end. Then Harlan's voice came through, ice cold. Confirmed. Theta 4 beginning ignition sequence. 10 minutes later, I watched the sky bloom. The Varathy, black site, satellite-fed and drone-guarded, lit up like a sun-going supernova. The sound followed seconds later, a delayed scream that cracked clouds and sent birds flying for miles. Molten fire ate through everything. Docking bays, labs, barracks, holding cells. Especially the holding cells. They had made a prison out of kindness, a slaughterhouse out of empathy. Not anymore. Back on the Vigilance. The survivors were treated in our medical bay. I visited the one who had spoken Seren's name. Her skin was pale, her blue light flickering weakly. Name? I asked softly. She hesitated. Vila, I repeated. You said Seren spoke of me before it happened. Vila nodded slowly. She said you would carry her song. I clenched my jaw. I'm not a singer, I said, but I remember every note. She took my hand, cold, fragile, then let others hear it. The footage we captured of the survivors, the graves, the destroyed black site didn't just spread, it exploded. Not just through Earth's rogue channels, but through Varathy communications, pirate networks, even neutral trade stations. The story of the one saved human and the army that came back turned into fire, and fire spreads. Within 2 weeks, 3 More human-led ships defected. Within a month, a coalition was forming: veterans, mercenaries, medics, smugglers, even diplomats who had been silenced for speaking out. The mission was clear. We weren't just going to remember the Avi. We were going to liberate every last one of them. Even if it meant war. Even if it meant going through hell again. This time, we were ready. Earth could keep its politics. We had something better: loyalty. Repaid in full. The hardest part wasn't killing them. It was convincing others we were right to. In the old days, war was declared by governments, signed off by bureaucrats who had never held a dying man's hand, or smelled burnt flesh in their own lungs. But now things were different. This wasn't some sanctioned campaign. There were no rules of engagement, no official chains of command. This was personal. The footage from Ericen Prime made it across half the outer systems. Before the Galactic Council tried to shut it down, didn't work. By then, the damage was done. They tried calling US terrorists. Didn't matter, because everywhere that message reached, it found someone who had bled under Varathy hands. Turns out the Avi weren't the only ones getting butchered and buried. The Varathy had been building their empire off the backs of dozens of species for decades, trading bodies for resources, offering security in return for obedience. They just hid it better when Earth was watching. But now Earth had stopped watching, and we had started acting. We were no longer just the crew of the Vigilance. Within weeks, we had a fleet. We called ourselves the Returned, made up of ex-soldiers, defectors, rebels, and mercenaries who didn't care about titles anymore. The only requirement to join: you had to believe in one thing. If you hurt the innocent, we will come for you. And we came fast. Our next target was on Alteris. A mining outpost turned into an Avi labor camp. Varathy Law said the workers were contracted debt servants, but we knew better. They worked under armed guard, lived in cages, and died in droves. The atmosphere there was barely breathable, and the radiation levels were enough to sterilize a man in 2 years. We got our hands on the blueprints from an old engineer who used to work for them, a human who said he spent 5 years watching Avi children collapse with bleeding lungs before he realized neutrality was just a coward's word for complicity. We didn't argue. We just gave him a gun and a suit. We dropped in under the cover of a dust storm. Seren ripped across our armor like razors, clogging optics and jamming servos, but we moved anyway. We moved because of that pain. We broke through the outer gates with the MP bursts and silenced blades. Dane covered our six while I led the breach team. Harlan coordinated from orbit, ready to bombard the upper silos if things turned hot. Inside, it was hell. Concrete corridors lit by flickering yellow lamps. The air tasted like rust and ash. The walls were stained with something darker than oil, and everywhere were cages, iron bars welded into the stone. Dozens of Avi crammed into cells too small to stand straight. Some barely older than infants, skin flaking, eyes dim. They didn't scream when they saw us. They just stared. No hope, no fear, just emptiness. I ordered the doors open. They didn't move. "Come on," I said. "You're free." Still nothing. It was the oldest male, barely breathing, who spoke first. "We are not free. We are bait." I spun just as the alarm started howling. Explosives tore through the southern wall. Varathy troopers in riot gear stormed through like wolves, plasma rifles hot, screaming in that guttural tongue they used before executions. They had set us up, used their own prisoners as a trap. Cowards. I'd up behind a broken terminal laid, suppressing fire, and shouted for evacuation. My men answered without hesitation, returning fire and forming a shield between the cages and the advancing death squads. Bullets, screams, smoke. Hell poured through that room like a flood. Dane took a shot to the ribs but kept fighting. Thompson lost his leg and still covered our rear. We don't leave anyone behind, and that included them. I kicked open the lock on the main breaker panel and overloaded the core. Lights went dead. Emergency protocols kicked in, and the cell doors unlocked on autofail. Still, they didn't run. The Avi just watched us bleed until one child, a girl thin as a twig with eyes like broken stars, walked up beside me and picked up a dropped Varathy sidearm. She raised it with shaking hands, then fired. One shot, dead center, right through the skull of a Varathy captain. The other Avi stared in shock. Then something snapped. They surged forward, not as victims, but as warriors. They picked up weapons, rocks, debris, anything. I don't know what they were saying. No translator could keep up, but the rage in their voices cracked the air like thunder. This wasn't just freedom. This was vengeance. We got out with 73 Avi, 30 wounded, 3 dead. We lost 2 men, Thompson and Kells. I buried them myself and put their tags in the Avi's Hall of Names, a room we built on the Vigilance for those who gave their lives not just in war, but for something that actually meant something. The Avi. Girl who fired that first shot, her name was Nara. She was 8 years old. She had lost her entire family in the early raids and watched her father torn in half by drone for stealing water. I offered her a blanket. She refused. She took a uniform instead. After El Terrace, recruitment tripled. We got word of entire human regiments deserting from the Earth Colonial Defense Forces, joining the returned in secret. Smugglers turned their ships into refugee carriers. Retired engineers came out of hiding to reprogram stolen Varathy drones. We weren't a fleet anymore. We were a movement. The Varathy responded the only way they knew how. They started executing Avi in public, hundreds at a time. They would broadcast it across the stars, hijack communication feeds, and interrupt civilian networks with footage of mass graves, firing squads, and orbital bombardments. They thought it would scare us. They thought it would break us. But what they didn't understand is that humanity doesn't run from monsters. We become monsters to kill them. Back in the war room, Harlan lit a cigar and pushed the latest transmission across the table. Satellite intelligence confirms a new processing site on Ether's Rim, he said. Thousands of Avi, heavily guarded, for defense towers to fleet carriers overhead. New prisoners? I asked. He nodded grimly. Just arrived. Shipped from 6 different moons. What about defenses? Elite Varathy, full loadout. Anti-orbital cannons. This is their stronghold now. This is where they centralized operations. I looked around the room at my officers, my brothers, my war criminals. They want a war, I said. Let's give them one. The plan was madness. We would send decoy ships to hit nearby outposts and draw the fleet carriers away. Meanwhile, a ground team would infiltrate the planet through a series of underground mining shafts, decades old and long abandoned. From there, we would launch a full frontal assault on the central compound while Harlan's modified fleet disabled the towers from orbit. It was suicide. But then again, so was staying silent. Before we launched, I went to the observation deck. Vila stood there watching the stars like Seren used to. Nara sat beside her, silent, clutching a small blade she had made herself. She told me you would return, Vila whispered. But I never believed it. I didn't answer right away. I didn't come back as a savior, I said. I came back because I owe her. And I'm not leaving until I pay every drop of that debt. Vila touched my arm. Then we will fight beside you. All of us. I shook my head. This isn't your war. It became ours, she said, voice hard. The day you bled for us. The day you remembered. 3 days later, we dropped onto Ether's Rim. I didn't know if we would survive, didn't care. Because in the end, this wasn't about living. It was about remembering who we became when someone dared to show us kindness, and what we would do when that kindness was taken from us. The wind on Ether's Rim tasted like poison, sulfur ash, and the distant reek of burnt flesh mixed with the thick humidity that clung to your skin. Like disease, the planet wasn't built for life. It was built for extraction. Giant drills pounded into the crust day and night, hollowing out its core while the Avi labored and died beneath the surface. We came in through the old mining shafts, just like we planned. They stretched for miles, twisting, collapsing in places, patched together with decades-old reinforcements. Half the tunnels weren't mapped. The other half were rigged with Varathy traps, motion-detonated mines, automated turrets, even poison gas dispensers for crowd control. We brought flamethrowers and counter-jammers. They brought cruelty and centuries of practice. We still made it through. Harlan was in orbit coordinating the diversion raids. 2 of our smaller corvettes staged mock assaults on supply depots across the moon's equator. The Varathy, arrogant bastards that they were, assumed it was a resource grab. They diverted their fleet carriers toward the southern ridge, exactly as planned. What they didn't know was that our main force, over 100 armed fighters, most of them former Earthborn infantry, was crawling through their basement. The air got worse as we descended. Pressure changes hit hard. My ears popped, vision blurred. The tunnels narrowed until we had to crawl on our hands and knees through sludge and rust. There was a moment, I swear to God, where I thought we would never make it, where the silence became so absolute that I started to hear my own heartbeat like a war drum in my skull. Then the tunnel opened into the holding pit, and hell came into focus. They weren't cages this time. They were coffins stacked 3 high, rows upon rows of metal boxes, each about the size of a human torso, sealed shut with only a sliver of air holes at the top. I checked the readings, temperature controlled, oxygenated just enough to keep the occupants alive, but immobile. Inside each one was an Avi, barely conscious, eyes open, but unblinking. They weren't dying, they were stored like inventory, like meat. One of our new recruits, Grady, barely 19, fresh out of training before he had gone AWOL to join us, looked at me with his jaw clenched. We still saving them, sir? Or are we just avenging them now? Both, I said, voice raw. Always both. We began cutting them out one by one, prying the lids open, dragging limp bodies into the open air. Some gasped, others just cried. Some didn't move at all. Out of the first 60, 12 were already dead. The rest weren't going anywhere fast. Call the medical teams, I said. Get evacuation birds ready for extraction. Copy that, came Harlan's voice over communications. You've got 10 minutes. Once those towers come down, the Varathy will know you're there. After that, I can't promise clean skies. We won't be here long, I said. We're heading to command quarters. Harlan's voice dropped. You sure you want to do that, Ridge? I looked down at an Avi child cradled in my arms. Her chest barely moved. Her wrist bore marks from manacles. Someone had tattooed numbers across her forehead like she was livestock. I clenched my jaw. I'm damn sure. The command quarters was buried beneath the central shaft, reinforced with triple steel barriers, armed with railgun towers, and guarded by elite Varathy officers. These weren't the usual death squad grunts. These were gene-enhanced soldiers, bred for war, enhanced with synthetic nerves and pain inhibitors, the kind you had to shoot 3 times just to make them blink. We took the first 2 towers down with coordinated drone strikes. Our stolen Varathy flyers moved fast, dumped thermite right into the tower's cores, and lit them up like flares. The 3rd tower fought back. We lost 7 men trying to breach it, lost 2 more dragging out the wounded dot by the time I got close. Enough to plant the charge. My armor was shredded and my communications were barely functional. But I got it done. The explosion shattered a mile of ground around us. When I stood up, covered in soot and coughing blood, the tower was nothing but a pillar of smoke. We advanced on the command cores with whatever strength we had left, and that's when they unleashed their ace. He came through the smoke like a machine wrapped in meat, tall, Varathy enhanced, covered in black armor that pulsed with veins of red energy. They called him Commander Sitch, Gene Prototype, killer of 3 revolutions. He was responsible for the engineering of the Avi storage coffins, and every death that came with them. He didn't speak when he saw us, just drew his blade, some kind of heated alloy, that hissed as it cut through the air, and charged. Dane tried to intercept him and got thrown 20 feet, breaking both arms. Grady fired a full clip into the monster's chest. He barely flinched. It was me he came for. I stood my ground and fired 3 rounds into his leg. To the faceplate, nothing. He slammed into me like a battering ram, cracked 3 ribs, and sent me flying. The only reason I survived was Vila. She stepped into his path as I hit the ground, held up a relic, something ancient, humming with light, and whispered a phrase I couldn't understand. Sitch froze like the air around him turned solid. His blade dropped, his armor flickered, his knees buckled, and then, without warning, he screamed, not in pain, but in terror. He fell to his knees, clutching his skull. What did you do to him? I gasped, coughing blood. Vila stood tall, eyes glowing. I reminded him what he forgot, a name, a song, a promise. Then she crushed the relic in her hand. Sitch imploded. His armor collapsed into ash, his body caved in like dry paper. And he was gone. We took the command cores in under 2 hours, disabled the defense grid, and freed another 300 Avi. We lost 12 more men doing it. War counts every drop, every soul. Back aboard the Vigilance, the medical bays were full. Nara sat beside Dane, holding his broken hand like she was willing his bones back together. He said nothing, just stared at her like she was something sacred, a survivor holding a soldier. We buried the fallen in orbit, released their ashes into the stars, and then, for the first time, I stood in front of my crew and told them what came next. This isn't just a liberation anymore, I said. This is a reckoning. We've hit their labs, we've burned their factories, but the head of the snake is still alive. The Varathy High Command sits on Rak Prime, Fortress World, naval seat of power, 7 moons, 17 defense satellites, untouched for a century. They think we won't come for them. I looked at every face in that room, human, Avi, hybrids, broken men and shattered children, fighters, survivors, ghost. They saved 1 human, I said, voice cracking. So now we save them all. Rak Prime wasn't just a planet. It was a monument to Varathy arrogance, from orbit. It gleamed like a crown, black oceans reflecting light from the artificial rings circling its equator. The planet was saturated with defense satellites, orbital cannons, shield generators, and enough warships to level 10 Earth cities in a single breath. It wasn't built to survive an invasion. It was built to make one impossible. I stared at it from the war deck of the Vigilance. The reinforced glass pulsing with silent proximity warnings. Every time we drifted near a patrol zone, This is suicide, Harlan said behind me. He wasn't trying to argue, just laying out the facts like he always did. We go in without a proper fleet, and they'll vaporize us before we hit the upper stratosphere. I'm not asking you to agree, I said. I'm asking if you're in. He didn't answer. Just pulled out a flask, took a long sip, then passed it to me. I took a drink. Harsh, burning, something synthetic brewed in the outer colonies. Tasted like regret and gunpowder. I buried 20 men this month, Harlan muttered, eyes fixed on the planet. And I'm still here. That means I'm too broken to quit or just angry enough to finish it. I nodded. That was his way of saying yes. In the operations chamber, Vila stood at the center table surrounded by the best tacticians we had, ex-generals, rogue AI pilots, and an Avi war savant named Lauren who once hacked a Varathy battle station blindfolded just by listening to the power GRID's pulse. This is not a battle we can win head-on, Lauren said, dragging 3 fingers across the hologram to highlight a vulnerable arc in the ring stations. But if we strike here at the shard relays, we collapse their entire orbital network. The rings fall, shields drop, then the fleet moves in. We'll only have minutes, said Dane, his arms still in braces from the last fight. That window closes and we're dust. Then we don't miss, I said. Simple words, but we all knew the weight of them. The night before the assault, I walked the lower decks. Morale was high but quiet. Men sat sharpening blades, tuning exosuits, writing final messages they would never send. I passed Nara kneeling beside a sleeping Avi girl, reading from a war manual like it was a bedtime story. She looked up at me once, nodded, then went back to her soft voice and stubborn hope dot up on the forward hull. Vila waited with 2 mugs of synthetic tea. Thought you need something that isn't gunmetal and whiskey, she said. I took it. I used to think vengeance would feel cleaner, I muttered. That once we got here, I feel right. And you don't, I shook my head. I feel tired. She sipped her tea. Seren once told me that vengeance is not justice, but it can lead to it if you don't lose yourself in the fire. I lost myself back on Ericen. Vila placed a hand over my heart. Then fight to be someone worth finding again. We attacked at dawn. Our stealth squadrons hit the shard relays first. Plasma charges planted on the inside walls of their magnetic tethers. We set the charges to overload and explode outward, sending the shards spinning into each other like celestial shrapnel. The first relay cracked, then the second. On the third, the Varathy woke up. Towers lit, alarms screamed. Entire sectors of the ring began shifting formation, deploying automated turrets and mobile coil cannons. Too late. The fourth relay exploded right through the energy matrix. A chain reaction ignited the ring's inner band, melting 30 kilometers of defense lattice. In under 60 seconds. Then the sky opened. Rak's planetary shield blinked, and our fleet dropped from high orbit like steel rain. The Vigilance led the charge. We weren't the biggest ship, but we were the loudest. We cut straight through the first Varathy cruiser, melted a hole through their left flank, and cleared a path for drop pods to land on the capital's outer dome. The first boots to touch the surface were mine. The city of Rak was something out of a nightmare. Twisting towers, biotechnic buildings that breathed, expanded, contracted. Each structure was alive with neural light patterns and defense mechanisms. We had to fight through walls that moved, floors that shifted under our boots. But it wasn't the city that haunted me. It was the silence. No civilians, no workers, only soldiers. We were walking into a tomb. They cleared the city, Lauren said over communications. They knew we were coming. Where are the prisoners? A pause. Then his voice came quieter than before. There are none on the surface. No Avi. No detainees, nothing. They evacuated. No. They consolidated. Underground, deep. I froze. They buried them alive. I whispered. We found the access shaft near the Citadel Center. 5 stories down through molten rock and locked vaults. We hit the heart of the facility. What we saw, no words will ever be enough. Tens of thousands of Avi packed into biopods, suspended, half awake, slowly drained of bioenergy and neural patterns. They weren't just storing them anymore. They were harvesting them, converting emotion, memory, and sentience into fuel. A full-scale conversion engine ran in the next room, using that stolen essence to power the Empire's weapons. That's what she died for. That's what her people were turned into. Batteries for war. I ordered everything wired with charges. We were going to erase this place from existence. But just before we lit the countdown, something flickered on the central monitor. A face. Varathy, regal, cruel. High Commander Torv, the man who authorized Ericen, the butcher of Eltaris, and the architect of the Avi conversion program. Human, he said, voice calm. I've watched your crusade with amusement. You believe you are righteous. I said nothing. You came back for them. You think that makes you noble. Still nothing. You are fools, he said. Empires are built on backs. Always have been. We just chose better materials. He leaned forward. You've won a battle, not a war. I cut the feed. Then I pressed the detonator. The explosion shattered the southern hemisphere. The Avi Conversion Center was gone, and with it, every record. Every scrap of their monstrous project. The cost, 38 more men to gunships. Half our drone fleet. But the message was clear. We are not done. Rak burned behind us as we pulled away, broken, smoldering, bleeding light into the stars. But we didn't cheer. We didn't celebrate. There were still Avi out there. Still systems locked under Varathy rule. Still ghosts dot as I stood on the war deck once more. Vila at my side, Dane leaning on crutches behind me, and Nera watching the stars. I felt something shift inside me. Not vengeance, not rage. Something quieter. A purpose that didn't burn anymore. They saved one human. Now we save thousands. And tomorrow, we would save the rest. The stars over Rak Prime didn't shine. The same after we burned its heart out. They pulsed with smoke and drifting debris. Ships hung in orbit like ghosts, broken hulks. Engine trails bleeding out into nothing. Some were ours. Most were Varathy. All of them were silent. We had done what no one thought possible. We cracked the Varathy capital, toppled their command grid, and destroyed their conversion chambers. But the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because the moment we took power, we had to figure out what to do with it. I stood in the burned-out rotunda of the Rak Citadel. The air was still thick with melting circuitry and ash. My boots stuck to the floor where blood had mixed with oil. Harlan was reviewing prisoner transfers on a hacked data pad. His face looked older now, not tired. Just carved from something that didn't age the same anymore. Still no word from Sector 9. I asked. He shook his head. The Avi we rescued there aren't talking. Not to us, not to their own. Something happened in that sector. Sabotage maybe, he said. Or worse, maybe they don't want to be saved. That thought hit me harder than any bullet ever had. We fought for them, bled for them, killed for them. But not all of them saw us as heroes. Some saw us as invaders, others as new masters. Back aboard the Vigilance, Vila met me in the briefing chamber with a report I didn't want to read. You need to see this, she said, laying the data chip down. I plugged it into the holotable. Footage rolled, security cameras from one of our holding centers. A repurposed Varathy detention dome now under our command. A human squad, all ex-infantry, leading a group of Avi detainees down a corridor. One of the detainees trips, stumbles from exhaustion or trauma. It's unclear. The squad leader responds by striking them hard. No hesitation, then drags them by the arm. The rest of the squad doesn't intervene. I felt my fist curl. Who authorized this? I growled. No one, Vila said. But it's not the only footage. She slid over 3 more chips. Different sectors, different squads, same abuse. I stared at the table for a long time. We came to stop this, I said quietly. Not everyone came for the same reason, she replied. At night, I gathered the command staff, my officers, my fighters, the ones who had been with me since Ericen. You know what this is, I told them. You've seen the rot before. Now it's growing in our own walls. Grady, leaning against the far bulkhead with his rifle across his chest, spat onto the floor. Should have known. Bring in mercenaries, ex-thugs, half of Earth's old black ops, and expect them to play hero. They signed the code, Dane said. One hand still in a cast. They knew what we stood for. And some of them never did, I said. They just wanted a license to kill monsters. They were monsters, Harlan said flatly. Yeah, they were. And we put them down like dogs. But now we've got our own barking behind the fences, and we're feeding them the same leash. Silence. Then Harlan spoke again, slowly. You want to purge them? I nodded. We start now. Quietly. Cleanly. Anyone found mistreating prisoners gets removed. Rank doesn't matter. Past heroics don't matter. We go back to what this was supposed to be, or we become the thing we destroyed. No one cheered. They just nodded. That's when I knew I still had a chance to hold this together. The purge wasn't pretty. 17 men detained, 9 court-martialed. On the spot, 3 tried to resist. Only 1 got a shot off. Missed me by inches. Dane tackled him to the floor and crushed his windpipe before I could give the order. I thought we were better, he muttered afterward, knuckles bloodied. We are, I said. That's why we're doing this. Meanwhile, the galaxy watched. The fall of Rak shook the power vacuum wide open. Fringe systems started rising. Other races began. uprisings of their own. But the chaos wasn't as clean as the stories made it sound. Without the Varathy Empire keeping the planet's chain, old grudges flared like wildfires. The Carry began slaughtering Varathy civilians on 3 moons. The Seren declared war on any system that ever hosted Varathy trade, and some humans, rogue splinter groups claiming to fight in our name, began attacking neutral planets, branding themselves as liberators under the flag of the Returned. But we didn't send them. We didn't even know them. They weren't fighting for justice. They were fighting for domination. Back in orbit, I visited the medical bay. Nera sat by herself, holding the hilt of a blade she had built from Varathy scraps. She didn't speak when I entered. I sat beside her. "You shouldn't have seen that footage," I said. "I needed to," she replied. I studied her face, older now, hardened. "Less girl, more ghost. I want to fight," she said. "You already did. I want to lead." That made me pause. "Why?" I asked. "Because they listen to you. And when you're gone, someone has to remind them why we started." The weight of that hit me deep. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small chip, a memory recording Seren had once sung into. Before she died, I had it cleaned, enhanced, stabilized. I handed it to Nera. "What is this?" she asked. "A promise." She held it like it was made of flame. That same day, Vila returned with news I hadn't expected. "The council wants to speak to you," she said. "What council?" "The Avi, a real one." She showed me coordinates, an abandoned station near the neutral zone, hidden, shielded. "They've been watching," she said, "waiting to see if you'd become like them." "And did I?" I asked. She looked at me hard. "Go find out." We took a single transport, me, Vila, Harlan, and Nera. The station was quiet, old tech. Organic walls covered in Avi growth markings. Inside, 12 Avi waited, each one with the weight of centuries in their eyes. The eldest among them spoke. "You are the one they saved," she said. "The one who came back with war in his heart." "Yes," I said. "And I brought peace too, at a cost." The council said nothing for a moment. Then the eldest nodded. "You understand now why we never fought back, because you didn't want vengeance, because we knew what it would cost. It would make us like them." I clenched my fist. "You think I became a monster?" "No," she said softly. "But we see the line you're walking." I looked at Nera. "I'm not walking it alone." The elder Avi stepped forward and touched my forehead. "We accept your path, but we do not join your war. Not yet." "Why?" "Because we are not ready to carry the hate you hold so easily." "Fair enough." We left the station in silence. Back aboard the Vigilance, I stood once more at the command window. Rak's fires were fading, but the echoes were still loud, and there were more systems still under the boot. We had won a planet. We hadn't won peace. Not yet, but the difference. Now, we knew what it would cost, and we were ready to pay it again and again. Because they saved one human, and until the stars forget that, we'll keep saving them all. Rak's surface was ash now. Cold ash. The kind that never gets carried away by the wind. Just settles in the bones of everything it touches. It had been 17 days since we took the Varathy capital, but we hadn't stopped fighting. Not once. Not even to breathe. You'd think the collapse of an empire would bring peace, but peace is the lie they sell in history books. What really comes after war is debt, blood debt, moral debt. Command decisions no one wants to make but someone has to carry. And I was the one carrying them. The Returned had grown too large to hold under one name. Now we had 3 major fleets. Mine on the Vigilance, Harlan's up in the Eastern Rim, and Lauren commanding a new joint force between human defectors and free Avi raiders. We had 27 liberated systems, but not all of them were stable. Some systems wanted independence. Others wanted revenge. A few just wanted to take what the Varathy left behind. We tried to set up provisional councils, Avi elders, human representatives, some Soren diplomats. It worked in 2 or 3 sectors, but in the others, power vacuum. And when power becomes a vacuum, it doesn't suck in peace, it sucks in monsters. The message came from a colony on Galith 9, one of the moons we had liberated in the early days. It had once been a processing facility for organ trade, the worst kind. But we had torn it apart, freed the survivors, and left the place in the hands of a local resistance cell and 2 of our men. Now it was burning again. Only this time, not by Varathy hands, ours. Or at least someone claiming to fight under the Return's banner. The footage was brutal. Avi civilians lined up, hands bound, accused of collaboration. No trials, no hearings. Just gunshots. My insignia, the original crest we had painted over the Vigilance's hull, was branded across the armor of the killers. One of them even said, "My name, by order of Commander Nolan Ridge." No mercy for traitors. I stared at that moment, pausing the video. My mouth was dry. My hand felt like it was holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. Harlan stood behind me, watching, silent. Who was it? I asked. We ran facial recognition, he said. It's Ericen, one of the mercenaries we absorbed after El Terrace. Didn't report for duty in over a month. Went rogue. Is he still breathing, for now? Last seen on Volcate building. A faction. Got about 80 men with him. Mostly fanatics. Give me a gunship, I said. I didn't take the fleet, didn't take Nera, didn't take Vila. This wasn't diplomacy. This wasn't policy. This was cleansing. I landed on Volcate with a rebreather mask and a sidearm, my old one, still scratched from the jungle of Ericen. The city was chaos. Half war camp, half shrine. Walls covered in propaganda bearing my face. Warped with slogans I never said. Ridge delivers justice. No tears for collaborators. Speak for the dead. Kill the living. When Ericen saw me step into his hall, he actually smiled like I was a god. I knew you'd come, he said. We've been waiting. You have no idea how much you've inspired us. I shot him in the kneecap before he finished his sentence. He collapsed, screaming. His men raised rifles. I didn't flinch. You think this is what I wanted? I shouted. You think this is what we bled for? Turning into the same monsters we buried? You gave us the power, Ericen gasped through clenched teeth. You taught us that mercy is weakness, that justice is fire. I taught you to fight for the ones who couldn't, I said. You started hunting the ones who didn't kneel fast enough. They betrayed us. They were scared. I raised my gun again, and, for the first time in months, I hesitated. Was I about to murder a man in cold blood? Had I already become what they feared? Before I could answer that question, one of Ericen's lieutenants made the mistake of drawing his weapon. He died first. The rest followed, 12 in total. I left Ericen alive, tied to the ruins of his own war banner. Let the locals decide what to do with him. When I returned to the Vigilance, I didn't speak for hours. I sat in the launch bay alone, and I listened to Seren's song on loop. Vila found me sometime after midnight. You needed to do it, she said, sitting beside me. I thought I did, I said. Now I'm not so sure. You stopped him. That matters. No, I whispered. It doesn't matter what I stop. It matters what I become doing it. She looked at me for a long time, then said the one thing no one else dared. Maybe you shouldn't lead anymore. It hit like a blade. But I didn't argue, because maybe she was right. We call the council of all the sectors, Avi, human, hybrid, Seren, even a few Varathy defectors. Lauren chaired it. Nera stood as my second, Vila at her side. I stood at the back. No command jacket, no badge, just me. We debated for hours what came next. What to build in the vacuum. How to avoid becoming a new empire disguised as saviors. That's when Nera stood up. Small, barely 15 now, her voice. Quiet, but full of fire. My name is Nera, she said. I was raised in a cage, freed by a man who bled for people he didn't know. I watched him become a warrior, and I watched him try not to become a tyrant. She looked around the room. We cannot rely on heroes anymore. Silence. We need councils. We need truth. We need people who remember pain but don't worship it. She stepped down. I met her eyes as she passed. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. As the vote passed unanimously, the return would dissolve. In its place, the Accord of the Freed, a decentralized network. Equal leadership, no supreme commander. And I stepped away voluntarily. They tried to offer me a ceremonial post, a council seat, a military advisory position. I declined them all, because I didn't want to shape what came next with my shadow. I just wanted to watch it grow. Harlan retired 3 days later. He didn't say goodbye, just left a bottle on my bunk with a note. You got further than any of us deserved. Rest now, brother. Vila took a place on the Central Accord Council. Lauren became head of reconstruction. And Nera began training the next generation, not for war, but for remembrance. I returned to Ericen Prime. The jungle had reclaimed most of it, but the sacred tree still stood, scarred, burned, but alive. Beneath it, I found the graves we had made. The soil was softer now. Grass covered the mounds. I planted something besides Seren's stone, a beacon. Simple tech. Not a weapon. Just a transmitter broadcasting one sentence on a loop across the stars. They saved one human. We came back. And we never forgot. The jungle of Ericen Prime had changed. The trees were taller now, grown wild around the ruins. The vines had swallowed most of the burned scars, wrapping broken stone and shattered metal in living green. It was quieter too. Not the silence of death that I had known years ago, when I was dragged here half dead, but the silence that comes When the earth has finally begun to heal. I stood at the base of the sacred tree, my boots sinking into the damp soil. Its roots still bore the charred black marks from the day the Varathy came. But in between the cracks, new shoots were rising, green, soft, alive. I rested my hand on the bark. I told you I'd come back. No one answered, but maybe that was the point. 3 days ago, I had officially resigned from all positions related to the Accord. No more titles, no more council visits, no more messages asking what to do next. I had done enough. I had bled enough. There were others now, leaders who didn't carry the rod I did. Men and women who hadn't been forged in betrayal and rage. People like Nera, who had seen fire and still chose to plant seeds. She didn't need me anymore. And truth be told, that was the best thing she ever gave me, freedom. I had built a small cabin in the northern ridge above the jungle, where the air was clean and the night still came with stars untouched by satellites or warships. Just one room, wooden walls, a roof strong enough to hold off the monsoons. No weapons inside. No communications equipment, just silence and time. I was supposed to rest. But something inside me didn't understand what resting looked like. On the third night, I heard footsteps, real ones, not dreams, not hallucinations, not ghosts. I stepped out onto the porch, sidearm holstered but loose, just in case. Then I saw her. Nera, taller now, stronger. Dressed not in armor, but in civilian gear marked with the Accord's new crest, a woven root spiral. Surrounding a rising sun. She didn't salute. Just sat down on the wooden step like it was the most natural thing in the world. You tracked me, I said. She smiled. You left breadcrumbs. Bad ones. We sat in silence for a while. The crickets filled the space between us. No war drums anymore. Just life returning. Then she spoke. They want to name a station after you. I raised a brow. A war station? No, a university. That actually made me laugh. Me? Teaching. Not teaching. Remembering. History, Nolan. Real history. I looked out over the ridge. Tell them to name it after Seren. She didn't hold a weapon. Exactly. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I read the report from Galith 9, she said. I wrote it, I replied. You left out the part where you spared Ericen. Wasn't mercy, I said. I just wanted him to live long enough to know he failed. Still sounds like mercy to me. I didn't answer. Then she pulled something from her satchel, a small metallic cube, a memory chip. Last time I came here, she said, I left with the promise that I'd carry the story, that I'd pass it on. She handed me the cube. This is the first archive entry. Voices from Ericen to Rak. Testimonies, survivors, soldiers, even Varathy prisoners. Who defected? It's all there. I turned the cube over in my hand. What do you want me to do with it? Finish it. She stood up. I'm not asking you to fight anymore. I'm asking you to tell the truth. All of it. Unfiltered. Unforgiven. They deserve to know what it really cost us. I looked up at her. Even the part where I lost control. Especially that part. She left before dawn, didn't say goodbye, didn't need to. The stars were starting to fade when I turned on the recorder. Inside the cabin, old equipment, analog. No filters, just my voice. This is Nolan Ridge, I began, former commander of the returned, first survivor of Ericen Prime, architect of the siege of Rak. War criminal, war hero, depending on who you ask. I paused. I'm recording this for anyone who still thinks war has glory in it, for anyone who ever looks at a flag and thinks it means something sacred. I was just a soldier, one of billions back when the Earth Alliance was still pretending to care about justice. I followed orders until I couldn't anymore. Until the system that trained me left me to die on a jungle moon full of civilians who had never lifted a weapon in their lives. And they saved me. They healed me, protected me, believed in me. And then they were slaughtered for it. Another pause, this one longer. I went back. Not because I was brave, but because I was furious. What followed wasn't a revolution. It was a reckoning. One fight after another. Not for land, not for resources. Just for the right to exist without being turned into fuel. We freed colonies, burned fortresses, killed monsters, and in the process, some of us became monsters too. I talked for hours. I told it all, every failure. Every name I could remember from the morgue files. Every Avi who died clutching the hands of a human they thought would protect them. I didn't hide my rage or my regret, because the truth wasn't clean. It was stained, and it needed to be told that way. Weeks passed. I got a letter from Vila. She was teaching now on a floating archive vessel that traveled from system to system. She said she had read Nera's speech at the annual remembrance ceremony. Said it made the diplomats cry. She sent me a photo too. A glass carving of Seren's face, eyes closed, singing. Right in the center of the Accord's new seal. Months later, I got another visitor. This time, a boy, young, barely 16, human, eyes sharp. He stood on my porch, boots muddy, holding an old combat helmet I hadn't seen in years. "I'm your nephew," he said. "Mom never told me much about you except that you vanish. But I found your name on a memorial wall on Earth. You're kind of a legend now." "Don't believe legends," I said. "Why not? They don't bleed." He didn't flinch. "I want to join the Accord." I studied him. "You want to kill monsters?" He hesitated. "I want to stop them." That was the right answer. I let him stay the night and taught him how to strip a rifle without breaking the chamber. But in the morning, I sent him back. Not because he wasn't brave, but because we had already paid enough for one generation. The last time I went to the graves, I brought a new stone. Not for a soldier, not for a commander, but for a child. Unmarked. She had died on El Terrace, buried under rubble. No one remembered her name, so I gave her one, hope. And as I stood there alone again, I realized something I hadn't felt since the first day this all began: peace. Not the kind they promise in treaties, but the kind that comes when the fighting finally leaves your soul and you're left with nothing but the truth. I don't know how long I have left. Doesn't matter, because the galaxy remembers now. Because they saved one human, and we came back. And we made sure the stars would never forget us.